Walt, we got a battle brewing down in Dallas. It's not the thriller in Manila. It's the thriller in the Big D. The day before Uber was supposed to announce their rideshare partnership for Autonomy with Avride, lo and behold, the Waymo cowboy comes to town and says, "Hey, we're driving her out." And that triggered all sorts of responses. Famed Uber investor Jason Calcana said, "No, not so fast. Every Waymo market is going to be Uber." You love Uber. What do you think is going on here?
Grayson, it's been a crazy week in providing us some more signal on a very popular topic here for the podcast, which is that Waymo and Uber relationship. I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen in the end game. As I've talked about before, we don't even know if the senior management 3 years from now will be the same as the management is today. I mean, Kokanis did bring up an interesting point where he's like, if United and Bonvoy hotels can be on Expedia, Google Travel, and sell direct, Waymo can be in Lyft, Uber, and their own network, which is, important point, right? Why? Just because you have your own network doesn't mean you can't plug into additional network. Obviously, a lot of differences between those industries in terms of needing demand. I just don't think right now, Waymo needs that demand. I think they have plenty of demand. And then, over the longer term, we'll see if the economics work out for them to, if they run out of growth at some point in the distant future, growth meaning demand for their product, do they need to go into some of these shared networks to drive additional demand for their product?
Having had years of experience in the airline industry, no, Waymo does not need an Expedia, a Priceline, Booking.com. They don't need it. Simply, they don't. I'm sorry. They don't have to pay the fees. They don't need the same structure. They don't need the infrastructure. And most importantly, they do not need the demand. You remember the story about a year ago when the Financial Times reported that Uber is looking at buying Expedia. I think there's a tweet archive that can pull some stuff up there, so we know that was debunked. No, because there is a very big trend growing in society that's not being discussed. Folks don't want to drive anymore. The less people want to drive, the better that is for Waymo. And no, they do not need Uber or any platform to generate demand.
So we kind of jumped ahead here. For our listeners who don't really know what we're talking about, let me just review what happened this week. I think it became evident that Uber was going to launch Dallas with Avride, something that we've talked about on this podcast before. As you know, Grayson and I have been in an Avride. We have video of this, so we know and have a high regard for their technology. But the day before they were about to announce this launch, Waymo steps in and says, "Oh, by the way, we're announcing that we're driver out in Dallas." So that's the issue that we're talking about. Like, could it be a coincidence? Sure. But I just don't think that this is a coincidence. These are too many of these coincidences that are occurring between these two companies that are supposed partners that is like one-upsmanship. And I've seen this happen in other industries. And again, that's why I'm talking about, does it provide signal for what this means over the long term for Waymo and Tesla? What's interesting is we had a friend of the podcast send me a video, which I've posted on my Twitter X account, that showed a Waymo in Dallas still with a driver in. Now, obviously, like in any market, there are going to be cars that are part of the network and then cars that are being tested by engineers. So that was probably the situation here. But it was just funny the day before and kind of underscored maybe this rushed announcement by Waymo to upstage its partner, Uber, by having a driver in that car in Dallas the day that they were, supposedly driver out.
And so, yes, let's get down to brass tacks here. Uber sent out an embargoed press release the day before, so Waymo obviously knew what was going on. So it really was a coincidence. So Waymo's bragging that they're a driver out. So what does Uber do? I mean, this is marketing fail 101. They post a video on X, which people ripped into, where they said, "Oh, here's the Avride." And the Avride's great tech. And then they strategically put the camera angle not to show the driver, but yet you can see the lower part of his body. What the heck is going on here?
I think they've learned that from some of the Tesla YouTubers who I've seen similar videos where they strategically place a camera to make it look, like they're not in the driver's seat, which is obviously not permitted. Yeah, I don't know. Like both companies doing stuff to get a press release on the tape. I'm not sure who they're trying to impress. I mean, in the meantime, the bigger fight here is with the broader kind of community that is trying to push back on autonomy. You've had, some incidents that Waymo has had in this past week. Maybe stuff that happened before this week in terms of dogs or whatever, but obviously the one that got a lot of play, which I saw on the Today Show, that's quote unquote mainstream media, although I'm not sure how many people still watch it, but playing up this Waymo driving, by someone that was in the process of getting arrested. And I think the bigger issue that these companies need to focus on is not the tit for tat between them, but making sure that they're emphasizing how much safer autonomy is and how this is good, and fight back on the kind of fear mongering that continues to go on. When at the end of the day, whether it's Waymo, whether it's Uber with Avride or others, or whether it's ultimately Tesla, why we need this, and the tens of thousands of people that die on these roads in America, and have that be part of your PR battle, not trying to one up someone who's your partner.
The bottom line is the industry for the whole has no leadership. There is no central individual trying to drive the narrative. On the other side, who's driving the narrative? Your partner does probably the best work of anybody out there in the industry of covering media, Rich Greenfield. It's the ad dollars. The more negative, bolsterous garbage they post, the more ad dollars they make. That's why they do it. Sensationalism.
Sure, there's a business motivation. Obviously, you want to talk about, just like we on this podcast want to talk about, even though we don't get no ad dollars, at least for this podcast. You want to talk about stuff that people are interested in. But you should, I think, provide some of the facts, and that's what we try and do, and try and provide that balance for those that hate Waymo for whatever reason, or hate Tesla. Maybe you should think about it this way. Let's get back to Avride, though. Again, technology that we've used. Tell me more about what we know about this initial launch that they have in Dallas.
With all due respect, it's odd. It's small. It's 9 square miles. Turtle Creek to downtown to other parts of Dallas, but 9 square miles. It's not going to cut it anymore. If you and I had this conversation 2 years ago, yeah, it's really good. We believe the Avride tech. You and I have been in the car. And for our listeners and viewers, I want to clarify, Walt and I were in the car with no safety driver. There was a safety attendant, no safety driver. So just want to clarify that. 9 square miles is not going to cut it in this day and age. And it's available on Uber X, Uber Comfort, and Uber Electric. But 9 square miles, not really making a big impact. How did the Uber stock react?
I mean, I disagree with that, because I don't know what the square mileage was in Austin for Tesla. I'm sure it was bigger. But you have May Mobility launching in Atlanta with a small service area. You have Zooks, also small service area. You got to start somewhere, right? And, for context, and we'll get to this more later, you're fighting against a Waymo who's the leader, who only has 2,500 cars in the market. So, any type of signal that Avride and Uber can provide about some of these trials, I think is positive, whether it's 9 or 30 or 50 or whatever it is. So I think it is a milestone, and it's certainly something that they should announce. And again, they should be announcing every minor step to get more visibility for autonomy in general. So,
but what value does 9 square miles do? So let's just say, let's call it a Waltism. In your opinion, as an analyst in this industry, what should be the leading indicator for service? Should it be 30 miles square zone, 20? What is that leading indicator where it's actually become a business? Because 9 square miles to me is still a science project.
It's all a science project. I mean, you could argue that Waymo is still a science project. They're still upfitting sensors on expensive cars. They're not doing integrated manufacturing line fits. So I just answered it. This is meaningful. Is it something to impact Uber's numbers? Obviously not. But even if they had 50 square miles in Dallas, that wouldn't have an impact on Uber's results. It's demonstrating to the market that there are other technology partners out there, and again, you got to start. You have to start somewhere, and it provides people like us to go down there and try it out again, and others, a broader market, to feel and touch this technology. In terms of Uber stock, I mean, I think interestingly, the stock performed well that day. There could be any number of reasons that was the case. I think they missed the point here on not seeing the Waymo announcement for the day before and the implications for that relationship. To me, again, great positives. Congrats to Uber. Congrats to Avride. That's a great positive, but like it just gave us more signal for something that I think, frankly, we alone have been talking about in terms of, the risks that exist on this Waymo Uber relationship.
There is risks. This is a hypothetical, but at some point, let's say Waymo removes the vehicles from Austin and Atlanta on the Uber network. That's going to have some impact. That's going to validate everything. That's going to have an impact if that happens.
Obviously, that wouldn't be good, right? And I think, in kind of the back and forth, well, it wasn't really that much back and forth, but in my response to Kalkanis's quote tweet, I was like, look, what if we'll see the early signal in terms of additional markets who Waymo chooses as their partner, and then I kind of hinted to the fact that like, and what happens with existing markets, like if one of these existing markets comes, because again, Dara's talked about these being shorter term contracts, if they don't get renewed, what does that mean, or what signal is that going to send to the market? And those that believe that the end game is that Uber and Waymo will work together. So good question, and something to, obviously that we're going to continue to monitor.
We have to continue to monitor, and I just want to say for the record, every single public announcement Waymo has made since Atlanta has been a non-Uber market. One's been a Lyft market, others have been various infrastructure partners, but not one has been an Uber market.
But hold on. Yeah, but hold on, because nearly all of those markets have been a no partner market. So, and I think, just because Uber has not been announced doesn't mean that they won't be announced in the future. We know Waymo does not want to service and charge their own cars, right? We know that. So there are, for every one of these, like in these 6 stages that we've talked about, for every one of these markets that we know are in process, there are likely additional announcements to follow with partners. And I think some people have suggested, I don't necessarily agree with this view, that maybe there's a longer term framework agreement or a broader framework agreement that Uber is working on. So a lot of these markets, all of a sudden they'll announce 7 at a time. I mean, I don't think there's what do they say, the non-zero chance of that happening. I would be surprised if that happened. That would be a very positive day for, I think, Uber stock. So I think, let's hold back on saying no markets were announced with Uber, because no markets were announced with anybody other than like, 1 or 2 here and there, one with Lyft, obviously, one with Avis, so we'll see if those progress. Avis didn't get more markets.
It's not Christmas, so we're not going to celebrate it, because I don't think it's going to happen. If you look at public statements, let's look at the CEO of Avis. On the past 2 earnings calls, the gentleman has talked very positively about wanting to expand the relationship with Waymo. He hasn't given definitives, but he is openly, publicly talking about in the earnings calls about expanding that relationship and how well it's going. So perhaps Avis is lurking out there.
Great. Do it then. That's my response to the Avis CEO. Do it. Talk is cheap. get some new markets signed, and then we'll talk. And frankly, you and I both have to go and see if they're even executing on the market that they've been assigned. We have no idea, right? I mean, if there's an opportunity for someone else to step in there, whether that's Lyft with FlexDrive or Avomo or whoever else out there wants to do it, until they actually deliver on a city and add more, whatever. I've heard a lot of CEOs promise a lot of things over the years. Let's see what comes true.
The old salty dog is out today, folks.
Sorry. Had to come out.
No, let's prove it. And next year, Walt and I will go visit these markets. We'll visit the depots. We'll make videos, and we'll really see what's going on. And on the expansion, we have new cities to go to now. We have Baltimore, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia all coming online as Waymo markets. It seems that Waymo's accelerating. I got a text with some of the industry to like, how fast is too fast?
I had another kind of back and forth on Twitter. This is with this person, Fred Lambert, who I think notably is like very anti Tesla. And he was saying, this is in this article that he wrote, was saying that this is a reflection of scaling. I think I misread what he meant, but it's just, look, in Wall Street terms, scaling means like adding cars to get you to profitability. I think his concept was, if you went back years ago, or maybe even not even that long ago, it seems like years ago, 18 months ago, before they kind of embraced AI and went down this generalization path, there was this concept that the Tesla bulls would say like, well, it's going to take you forever to launch a new market, right? Because you have to map it out and it's going to blah, blah, blah. I think we even probably talked about that in early days of this podcast. But obviously, 2025 has been a changing moment because of AI, and in this case, this ability to generalize. So like this is not new. Yeah, of course, Waymo can open up new service areas and they can scale the technology that way. So I think I probably misread what he said. With that said, scaling to investors means getting, adding at this point, thousands of cars. Why? What is the relevant market size? I mean, Uber and Lyft have what, 2+ million cars on the road. So if you're getting to 5,000 cars by the end of next year in a market of 2 million, like, is that scale? Now, if this was 5,000 cars in California, where you're scaling to deal with the airports, deal with the long distance driving, go for the longer service area, sure. But like, you're announcing a lot of new markets, and then you pair that with, if you believe that there's 5,000 markets, what are you really allocating per market, right? So then if it's only a couple hundred cars per market, and again, maybe that works in Austin, given, the kind of the dynamics there, is a couple hundred cars per market where you might have to wait 15 minutes for a car count as scaling? Like, is that real? Or is that you're criticizing AV Ride for 9 square miles? Like, if I have to wait 15 or 20 minutes for a car, is that scaled service? Are you generating a profit in that market with 200-300 cars in Philadelphia? And if not, like, when do you get to the point where you do that? So like, that is the concept of scaling, for the investor. And frankly, like, again, it's this, how big is the lead? Let's put Tesla aside for a second. I don't know who Wayve is going to partner with. We know who Noro's initial partners are. We'll talk about GM in a little bit here. Like, we're at that inflection point. Things are happening. Maybe there'll be reallocation of resources with whoever Wayve and Noro and May Mobility and others partner with to quickly get up to that 5 or 10,000 or 20,000, or really getting to the point where they're cranking out thousands of cars, on a monthly basis. And we'll get to that. It's going to happen. It's just not really, we're not at that point right now.
You know how we get to that point? We get a public number from Hyundai, from the Savannah plan, of how many Waymos are going to come out a year. Then we can start to model. Then things get really interesting. And I'd rather wait 15 minutes to have an autonomous ride than wait 5 minutes to have a human ride. I know I'm in the minority, but that's me. But we get numbers out of Savannah, we can start to model.
I mean, I think we have a sense of the roadmap, right, for all of these technology companies with their OEM partners. And we know that's planned, for years out. So, Waymo's not unique in, having these plans, whether it's them with Hyundai or, May Mobility, if their technology moves forward and they, drive down their roadmap with Toyota. You don't think Toyota can crank out a shit ton of cars? I mean, we're still early stages here. No one's dominating the market quite yet.
Tuesday on Road to Autonomy, Ed Olson's on. He's going to talk about that Toyota relationship and their expansion in Southeast Asia. So tune in for that. Ed gives some good nuggets there. But and Waymo wasn't done this week, Walt. They also announced they went driver out in Houston. I'll use the term, they smothered Uber from a news perspective this week.
I guess, but I think there's kind of a diminishing marginal return on these markets. It's good for those individual markets. You generate local press. But I think for our listeners, I don't know. I mean, you can at me on the comments or whatever, but like, do these markets, are they as meaningful as, expanding the number of cars on the road, right? What is more important at this point in terms of getting to that, again, this scalability question? The only other question I had on this, Grayson, is where does this, Baltimore, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Philly, where does that land on our 6 stages of autonomy, which we got some good constructive feedback on? We're sticking with it though. six stages: testing, road trip, flag planning, safety driver, driverless testing, and then commercial launch. Although now that you're so upset about 9 square miles in commercial launch, maybe we need to make a 7th stage of autonomy, getting to some level of scale. But where do these announcements in these 4 cities and then Houston land on our 6 stages of autonomy?
To me, it's flag planting. And for Houston, it's driverless testing, because Waymo's planting a flag and saying Baltimore, St. Louis, these are Waymo markets. They're planting the flag, and they're going to start to generate the local press to I don't want to say corner the market, but to set the perception in that market of what they want to be. So I'm going to say that's flag planting.
So it's still 2 stages away from driverless.
Correct. Yes. And we do not have any independent confirmation of vehicles being delivered to those markets yet.
Yeah, always a key factor that, that you and I are now obsessive about. But Grayson, I pat you on the back a lot, but now there's, to be honest with everybody, sometimes you get things wrong, and you were on here, I forget with how much, confidence, saying that like, oh, Waymo's in Miami, and this is a clear sign they're gonna go to Art Basel. Let me ask you, Grayson, were you able to take a Waymo to Art Basel this week in the lovely Sunshine State? Actually, you're not the Sunshine State. What are you, the Florida Man State?
Well, I got the beard for that, but we are the Sunshine State. No, it stunk. I had to go in a human-driven vehicle. It wasn't fun. Boring. Want. Terrible experience. Waymo had an opportunity to run painted cars around the city, channeling the old BMW painted cars with Piecyk and Warhol, and send a statement when all the eyes in the art world and the investment world, let's not forget, the investment world were on Miami. Waymo, in my opinion, lost a major cultural opportunity.
Do you think he got too excited? Because the dates, were kind of tight, meaning they announced no more safety drivers on November 18th, and then Art Basel is December 5th. So, like, is it really fair to criticize them on, like, expecting a 2-week turnaround until you get to commercial service?
Yes, then why announce it? Because everybody in the region was looking forward to Art Basel. It's a cultural impact event, and they were expecting it.
The only thing I saw out of culture that Art Basel that was interesting is those little robots with Bezos and Zuck's head on them, like pooping out pictures. What was on the pictures, by the way? Was it pictures of crap, or was it just pictures of something else? I don't know. You can look it up for our listeners, Art Basel, whatever, robot exhibit. I want to go back to the Kalkanis tweet, though, because the other thing, as we know, Kalkanis, who's one of the co-hosts of the All In podcast, they've got a good relationship with Elon, longstanding relationship. I mean, the other question I would have is like, does anyone really think that like Tesla is going to need Uber in 100% of the markets? Like, why wouldn't that if there's a need for demand, and if United Airlines should go on Expedia, shouldn't his good friend at Tesla also go on, the Uber network? And there seems to be zero indication from Tesla. And I don't think there's going to be any management change at Tesla that would change that dynamic. So, I mean, thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at Jason's argument, you're correct. But you and I both know, no, it's never going to happen for vehicles. I do believe at some point when Tesla Semi achieves scale and drive her out, it will go on the Uber Freight network if Uber still even owns Freight at that point. But Robotaxi, no way, Jose.
Different dynamic for sure, and I don't disagree with that in terms of getting those trucks onto the Uber Freight network. And I think great things happening also at Uber Freight. I'll use this as a quick opportunity to just update. I am on, to our listeners, I'm in the group that gets the most recent software for FSD. So I have 14.2.1 stuff that Elon has talked about being able to text while driving. I don't do that. I'm still very careful with these technologies. But I will say all these complaints that I had for version FSD 13 have disappeared, meaning like there's no hesitant braking. There are times when I was in a lot and the car was about to make a left and it almost like corrected itself. I think that's what it means by sentient. So, I mean, it is the best that it's been. It's super smooth. Now, it's not at the point where it can be a robotaxi. Why? Because the mapping in some cases is still an issue. Like it's just, when it's coming out of my garage now, it's actually turning into the house versus like doing the not logical thing. So there's still, and getting out of parking garages, which I think I've seen other people that are early adopters have had this similar issue. So there's still those types of kinks to work out. But in terms of the smoothness and the safety when you're on the roads, it's really been a great experience in 14.2. It's a pleasure to drive. Or not drive. I should say it's a pleasure to not drive.
You're right. I recorded a whole SAE podcast on not driving, and I'm very lucky to have 14.2.1 as well. Much better, much smoother. The one issue, and to the team that's listening, please fix school drop off and pick up. And so instead of trying to go out of the pickup lane, stay in the pickup lane, just like you have parking lot mode, driveway mode. Let me have the ability to do school pickup. That'd be great. I want it. I think a lot of people would want it, frankly.
Now, Grayson, since I gave you some grief for your bad Art Basel prediction, I'm going to now shift and give you and pat you on the back, because when Sterling Anderson first left Aurora to go to GM, you were saying like, well, maybe this is an indication he's getting kind of queued up, perhaps to be the next CEO. And we've gotten some additional signal this week that I think is a little supportive of that. First, you have that Sterling was able to hire someone, the Ronald Mann, which is a former Cruise and Tesla executive, and that person is reporting directly to Sterling Anderson. And then again, part of this, like, hey, you're going to see a lot of media on him. CNBC, I think, did a piece on him where he talked about, what he's doing at GM and stated, specifically, just be clear. This is a Sterling Anderson quote. Just be clear. We're developing a self-driving product. It's a self-driving product that can be safe without any handbacks to the human in safety critical situations. So that's a pretty bold statement from a very large company. And again, supportive of like Sterling, just, very high profile at this massive company in GM.
Mr. Anderson's doing a great job. And now I got to get a new hat for the collection. Well, I got to get the clap hat. Remember those? The old clap hats, clap, clap?
Yes, I do remember those.
So thank you for that. But Mr. Anderson is transforming an American icon of a company and pushing the company full steam into autonomy. And I still stand by my call that he will be CEO at some point. And I'll also go further that I think when you see the 2028 Cadillac IQ, that's just the first step of truly where they want to go. And as we talked about in past podcasts, you will get to urban roads, but looking at all the attention, looking at the hires, looking at the culture, looking at how they're rebuilding compute, they're rebuilding the sensor architecture, the infrastructure, they got something big cooking there.
They do. I'm, as you know, generally skeptical about OEMs being successful. I think you've got, Rivian next week is going to try and talk about their own self-driving, capabilities. I'm skeptical, but Sterling, we obviously have a lot of respect for. Just, kind of a random other question. When he left Aurora, there was a gap between when the announcement with GM was, and Aurora's narrative was like, oh, he's not going to be competitive, not doing anything competitive. Like, I get it that Aurora is like, focused on trucking. They also have a relationship with Toyota on the driving side. Do we really consider this to being not competitive? Like, you're leaving an autonomous company and now you're going to a larger, well-capitalized, maybe I don't know how capitalized they are, but, a larger company with a lot of resources to do autonomy. That's not doing something in some way competitive with what Aurora was developing?
If you talk to Aurora, they'll tell you they're developing the Aurora driver. And if you read their SEC filings, they'll show you a multitude of vehicles. But if you actually look at reality, the company is purely an autonomous trucking company. I've asked them many times privately, are you developing the cars? So yes, we still have a relationship with Toyota. But if you look at the income statement, there's no revenue anymore from Toyota. So I believe that Aurora is becoming a full self-driving truck company. And so technically GM does not have a truck division in the United States. So there is really, it's hard to say they compete.
It sounds like I'm talking to a lawyer over here. The bigger question here is like, you have a guy that is now leading an autonomous effort at GM who just hired, someone that was a former Cruise and Tesla executive. Like, wouldn't Ronald Mann wouldn't the benefit of having that person at Aurora have been a positive for Aurora had he stayed there?
Yes. It'd be a positive if a lot of people stayed there.
All right. Well, I'll move on. I just had to bring that up because I always remember at the time, like what is Sterling really going to do, given his past expertise? By the way, he's doing autonomy. All right, Grayson, let's go across the pond, as they say. Our friends at Wayve are acquiring a company, I guess, called Quality Match. I don't know anything about this. Tell our listeners what we need to know about Wayve acquiring Quality Match.
The bottom line is, keep it simple. It's going to help Wayve accelerate the Wayve driver. It's a labeling technology that's focused on autonomous driving that's going to help them to accelerate faster. So we don't know what the acquisition price is. We don't know if it's a talent move, but it's good for Alex, good for the team. I think you're going to see big things from Wayve next year.
Okay, so let's go to the foreign autonomy desk. Do we have any news this week? Because I think we had a lot from China last week. I didn't see much this week.
Yeah, Wayve released a new model. So staying on the Wayve theme, the GIAA3 model. It was trained on 15 billion parameters in a generative world, and so simulation helped them accelerate. And then Walt, the detectives and us came out. We got a photo, a Waymo vehicle in London. And how do we know? Because it had the UK privacy thing on the side of the vehicle. So Waymo's in London. Wave's getting ready to scale. Uber says they're going there with Wave next year. London's a big market for us to watch. That's the foreign autonomy desk this week.
So Waymo in London, and the Europeans seem more willing to accept Chinese vehicles. Obviously, we already have the Zeekr relationship. What do you think the odds are that Waymo, as they think about their global aspirations, addresses this scalability issue, this supply issue, with an additional Chinese manufacturer only to be used outside the United States?
You're asking me this today on December 5th. I say there's a high chance, but I've been following chatter in the European Commission where there is some sovereignty where we do not want to give away our market to China emerging. So I'm a little more hesitant going into next year just based on the chatter coming out of the European Commission.
I mean, isn't there also some trust issues? There's one thing to bolt your sensors onto a Chinese vehicle, but if you're ultimately getting to the point where you're integrating it to the manufacturing, doesn't Waymo have any concerns about, protecting their IP as they deal with companies that, ultimately go back to a central government that might use that technology to help their own technology development?
So if you talk to Waymo, and there was multiple government documents that came out on this, Waymo says that they're quote unquote purchasing a shell from Zeekr, none of the components, none of the technology things. I say that's bullshit because at some point you're going to have bleed somewhere. Where it is, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate, but you're going to have bleed somewhere.
But I mean, there's another answer there, which is like, okay, they're doing this with Zeekr and right now they're upfitting, but when they get to true scale where it's basically integrated into the line, maybe that means Zeekr can't really be a partner for them.
Potentially, because then the bleed really comes into effect, and then all suddenly you see knockoff Waymo vehicles showing up in China. We see it happen with the traditional auto manufacturers with the JVs. If you want to study the history of this, look at when American and European auto manufacturers entered the Chinese market. They had to do a joint venture. Look at the history of those contracts and look at what happened today. And that's something that needs to be studied, especially with these autonomy companies look to enter that market.
All right. I'm glad you're still fired up about the unforced error. So let's finish up on trucking and I guess regulatory. What have we learned in I think this is your favorite state, Grace, in California. What is happening in California now? I think there's positive things happening. Yes.
Well, it depends on who you ask. There's positive things. That's a broad question for California. You've got the Writers and Directors Guilds that's in uproar in LA. You got politicians in San Francisco that are in uproar. So it's a mixed bag. But in Sacramento at the DMV, they opened up a 15-day comment period where they are looking at potentially, because it's not done yet, allowing the testing of driverless trucks, which the union is going to fight, and they're thinking about allowing commercial trucks. So a very positive step from Bernard Soriano and the California DMV in the right direction. But I have to be me. They're asking for too much data, and we know what happens when you give the government too much data.
What happens?
What happens? What does California have, Walt? They have a budget shortfall. You get a retroactive tax. And you're starting to see that on the exit tax now, and you're going to see that exit tax strategy work its way through any industry with deep pockets. And I'm telling you, that data will be taxed at some point retroactively. Well, they're going to tax. That's California. Shifting gears to New York, the CEO Shouty Ho on Bloomberg talking about the economics of autonomous trucking. And he had a conference at UBS talking about it as well. So it's really starting to build as the momentum for autonomous driving builds, autonomous trucking builds. What do we need to look for next week in the autonomy markets?
Well, you picked that up off of a conference. I think there's other conferences, investor conferences next week. Who knows what new information we have? Obviously, Waymo continues to like to announce things. Although, how many more markets can they announce before like you can only spread those incremental 2,500 cars to a certain amount? But you never know. And obviously, I mean, it is December 5th. The big elephant in the room, still waiting for that safety attendant in those Teslas down in Austin. We're on the clock here. Will they come out? Maybe next week's the week. Maybe it's the week after, December 31st. Who knows? But we're getting close to the end of the year, which was the prediction for that attendant to come out in Austin.
26 days and counting. The future is bright, the future is autonomous, the future is scaling. Robotaxis. Walt, until next week.